It is that time of year again, as October begins to close out, the days get shorter, and the darkness slowly creeps in, more and more. It is signaling the end of the harvests, and the beginnings of the long, dark, cold winter. It is the last bits of life of the season, and it is during this time, at the end of October, that the veil between the living world and the world of the dead is said to be at its thinnest. It is a time where spirits and entities can enter our realm and wreak havoc if we let them. Sometimes, the only thing we can do is try and blend in, with hopes to remain unseen by nefarious beings. When we think about and prepare for Halloween in modern times, we think of candy, jack-o'-lanterns, dressing up both for kids and the more devious adult world, trick-or-treating parties, candy, etc. For some, they might say it has become too corporatized like every other holiday, and that it's only for going out, dressing up, and having fun, an excuse to indulge ourselves, put a costume on, and act out our most basic carnal pleasures. Like all holidays or festivals in the modern times, many spend time contemplating how it has lost its meaning, the true meaning of said holiday or festival. And in this example, we are looking at Halloween, and there are many who say we have lost the meaning of Halloween. Perhaps so much so we might not be sure anyone can pinpoint what the meaning ever really was, and if there was one. Rarely, of course, despite whatever the church would have you believe, there is rarely only one real meaning behind anything. Halloween falls right in Scorpio season, like the ending of the harvest and the creeping in of winter. Scorpio is an astrological sign known to represent death and rebirth, changing and the darker, more subversive and frightening aspects of this cycle. It is the sign of entropy, of decay and ruin, and of darkness. We could say people born in this time are more accustomed to death and rebirth cycle, more comfortable in the dark and gloomy, the dying and the dead, the spirit world, the cult, etc. They are said to be able to handle drastic changes better than most, due to the dark changing and intense period of the year. The transition to winter is an interesting time. It is a time where nature appears to die off. Crops stop producing, the rains and cold come in, even the sun appears weak and hidden. Many cultures viewed this time, at least in the northern hemisphere, with the thinning veil where the spirit world happened, and the demons and fairies and spirits were able to cross over into our world to interact with our world. In the Celtic world, Samhain was the name of November, and it was a festival that marked the beginnings of winter and the darker half of the year. In the early known rituals of Samhain, once the harvest work was completed, people would light a community fire using a wheel that would cause friction and spark flames. The wheel, a symbol of the sun. During this fire, cattle would be sacrificed, and people would take a flame from the communal bonfire and relight their hearths, which were left to burn out during the harvest. This festival would last 3 days and 3 nights, where everyone in the community was required to show themselves to local kings or chieftains. Punishment for not doing so would usually be regarded to be doled out by the gods with illness and or being unalived. As with any celebration, the one thing that remains from these very beginning Halloween-like festivals, there was some mention of 6 days of excess drinking and feasts. The Celts believed that the barrier between worlds was breachable during this time, so they made offerings that they would leave outside their villages for fairies or spirits. As the Middle Ages progressed, the fire festivals became known as Sonagans, which were more personal Samhain fires near to the farms, and were said to protect the farm from fairies and witches. Carved turnips called jack-o'-lanterns started appearing attached by strings and sticks and had burning coal. It wasn't until later in America that this became pumpkins. Some traditions had men tossing burning wood at each other and setting off fireworks in other areas began using noisemakers. They believed that this narrowing of the worlds, the old passed away ancestors would come and visit. They would set empty spots at the dinner table for the visiting ancestors. The food of the feast would only be consumed after the ancestors were invited, which would give a chance for people to interact with the spirits. Children would play games to entertain the dead, while the adults would tell the spirits of the goings-on of the world for the past year. The doors and windows at night would be left open for the spirits to come in and eat the cake that would be left out for them. It wasn't until the 9th century that the church would try and rename this time and try and use the popularity of the celebrations to turn it into a religious theme. November 1st would become All Saints' Day, and the 2nd, All Souls' Day. October 31st would become All Hallows Eve, or Halloween. From at least the 16th century, dressing up around the holiday was happening in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man, and Wales, and people would go around house to house in costume, singing songs or carols for food. Going house to house caroling wasn't strictly a Halloween custom. This was a familiar custom for many holidays, with the idea of giving to the less needy during these times a sign of morality. During Halloween, however, people would impersonate the souls of the dead in order to protect themselves from these spirits and dead souls. In Scotland, youths would go around to house reciting verses in exchange for food. Giving food was said to provide good fortune, and failure to do so, bad fortune. Some areas the youth would threaten mischief if they were not welcomed. Hollowed out turnips were used as lanterns and were said to ward off evil spirits, and were common in parts of Ireland and Scottish Highlands in the 19th century. It wasn't until early 20th century in North America that Halloween started to become more of what we know of now, with pumpkins and trick-or-treating as the branding of the night. As we get further into modern times, things like amusement park haunted houses and a plethora of movies and pop culture have shaped what we know of Halloween. Mass marketing of costumes and symbols that now represent the holiday, more than it represents any deeper meaning, especially in regards to the idea of the changing of the seasons, the spirits and the souls. Now it's all horror movies, sexy costumes, and kids going dress up to get loads of candy and get spider and witch stickers while watching cartoons with a bit of a spooky element. Halloween in the recent modern times, like almost all things we do in our culture, are devoid of real meaning, has the appearance that the holiday we grew up with is still active and relevant, but it seems like it is holding on by tradition only. People still get excited about dressing up and going out for a fun night of debauchery, but that is but a surface level of what Halloween was about during its early stages. What we still practice today is an empty husk, a shell of a former meaningful and symbolic event and celebration. And will and do people have fun? Absolutely. And definitely I would never say that people shouldn't go out and have fun. Be their debaucherous selves. The people back in Samhain times probably were just as much. But there was also a deeper symbolism and meaning that in reality shrouded all of life with people back then. Each day only growing in importance at the signs of the winter coming. Before electricity and running water, etc., winter was a dangerous time. There was no supermarkets with food to get at any time of day and night. You had to plan ahead and make preparations for winter. Winter was something you had to survive every year. With that pressure, importance of taking care of any bad thing, seen or unseen, spirit or living person, should be prepared for. You need to keep bad luck away. If your crops that you preserve for the winter rot and go bad, you starve. So the interest in appeasing spirits and souls and fairies becomes much of a bigger idea. Whereas for the affluent New World, without or ease of access to food, at least for the majority of people, spirits and bad luck avoidance don't necessarily have the life or death trait that used to be a thing in the past. That is, until we are confronted with something that is life or death, or monumentally challenging for us. And then we as humans seem to revert back to our more, I hesitate to say, superstitious ways, but that's the common vernacular. You could say that we fall back or become more in tune with our spiritual side, or the spirit world. The veil becomes evident again, and this, we could say, is the sign that the world is approaching the end of this current cycle. As we face crisis after crisis, the rise of occultism and so-called superstition will see a continuous rise. Meaning will have its day again, and a new world will be born. And this is the true meaning of Halloween. And from there, we can start the whole thing all over again. For on the other side of winter is spring. Okay, now it's time for you to tell me what you think. Has Halloween become meaningless, too corporate? Let me know in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out a small channel like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.